military action of Washington in Venezuela. There have been statements made by the Russian Foreign Ministry who are in solidarity with Havana in the conditions of this forceful pressure. We will further support the brotherly people of Cuba. I would like to announce that the talks will start with introductory statements. They will be broadcast in social media accounts and Russian Foreign Ministry online resources. Now let us go on to international agenda, and I will start not with the issue of Ukraine, as according to our tradition, but the Munich conference that has caused a lot of feedback. It's actually regarding the security policy, but it's a deception because the title does not correspond. Regarding the organizers of this event, we have made our comments and we would like to provide our assessments of what has happened in Munich. It was the 62nd conference, so it has history, held starting from February the 13th in Germany. But the tendency is confirmed of the Munich conference losing its status as a platform for discussions on the problems facing the world. Before, it used to be a platform for dialogue. When countries of global majority and not of global majority came there, they had an opportunity to make assessments. But now the opinion, our country has its right for the opinion. The opinions are blocked or somehow erased. So literally the dialogue was being destroyed before our eyes, and it was impossible to make a statement. It even came as far as noise. It was not something that was not allowed, but they just did not want to hear that. The organizers did not want to hear that and did not want others to hear that. Then it became some show, you know, just those passports, bricks that the Kiev regime brought, and they were not asked questions. And seriously, the curators of the Munich conference, they did not even try to talk to the Kiev regime. But now the situation went further, even better to say deeper. It was not only the basis, but it was time for this conference that allegedly deals with international security to talk about international terrorism that is now being developed and that just affects the European continent. And the Kiev regime is engaged in the spreading of weapons, illegally spreading weapons. It's just beastly corruption that nurtures all this terrorist, horrible tragedy for the victims. And for the Kiev regime, it's just a crime, actually a crime. So it's just a good occasion to talk about that. For decades, during the Munich conference, they discussed terrorism, they discussed ISIL and so on and so forth, but now nothing has been said seriously, even briefly, nothing has been mentioned. And the issue that is now seems to be just primary now, the Palestine settlement. It used to be of great interest to the West, but now such American initiatives, they could have been discussed, but no. So what was that? Well, this year we saw in Munich just disputes within the Western communities. So dialogue or political scientists representing different points of view in the world. We just saw the just internal dispute. And some time ago, it used to be aggressive with regard to other centers of power like Russia and China. Now it has turned out that they started to argue before the eyes of the surprised public. It was not a surprise actually for us. It was not surprising because we just predicted how the situation will develop. And the existence of this conference that will stage by stage abolish those principles on the basis of which it has been created. We were not surprised that in order to erase internal contradictions, the Western participants in the conference, they were looking for external enemies, not from the point of view of the analysis of the reality, but some commercial actions. Like some propaganda. When they found external enemies, they started to accuse them of destruction of the rules-based order so dear to European and American globalists that no one has seen, has witnessed, and it would be not a bad idea to formulate it somewhere. For several years, I think around 7 years, 6-7 years started before the pandemics. The Russian Federation, in all the levels, asked those questions regarding Western mainstream. What are those rules they want to build their order on the basis of what? We just softly and then more and more actively made hints that it will just fail. It's impossible to build on the principles they do not have any idea about themselves. Maybe only one rule, the rule of the right of the strong. Now in Munich, instead of saying that Russia, it was right, and the president of the Russian Federation just had warned us, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation also here at the Munich conference just lectured us on that, and we did not hear his lectures. And there is no rules-based world order. They're just like an Andersen fairy tale about a naked king. They saw themselves and they started to cry that they are naked. It's probably not the final stage, because when they will look at the mirror, they will see the reflection. It brings us back to this quotation by the president of the Russian Federation. And now let us see what happened at that Munich conference. The forum in Davos marked an end of an era in international relations, and the Munich conference marked the end of transatlantic unity. Why? We have mentioned that today, because they quarreled with each other before the eyes of the global majority. They have never respected that majority. They taught it. They thought that it is not developed enough, the global majority. And the conclusions made by political scientists, they do not have the right to be 100% exact, but in essence, it's difficult not to agree with them. The discussions that took place in Munich, this discussion is useful, but from a practical foreign policy perspective, it is secondary. It is important to know what the narratives there are, but we will base our foreign policy it will be based on our domestic interests. The discussion was on the issues that concern the global majority. So what are those issues? Let us name them. For several years, we have seen a horrible tragedy in the Middle East. Apart from the fate of the Palestinians, there is a number of acute international crises in the Middle East created directly by the West with their curators. Crises in the Middle East, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, they have created, they are still not resolved. And the situation in the global economy, they have provoked with their decades of sanctions, trade wars, illegal, illegitimate measures of putting obstacles to the development of other countries. And they have destroyed the free market. The Westerners have destroyed it. We can also discuss that, organize some round table. How they managed that? They talked about making economy more liberal, self-regulated, and then lead the world through globalization, and then find ourselves in a situation of destruction of the basement on which they had built global economic relations. And destroying those pillars by their own hands, not by terrorists. Now the situation in international security that has come to a very dangerous point due to a complex set of interrelated factors. The end of operation of the latest strategic arms limitation treaty, and there is a whole range of acute international issues that need to be discussed. In terms of thematic content, the Munich conference, it's just very weak, and it is losing to such forums as the Sorbaniyas Forum in the UAE, the entire diplomatic forum held in Turkey, the Doha Forum organized in Qatar. It's losing to those platforms. And I would like to also mention the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum that has become a universal platform where really global problems are discussed, as well as the Eastern Economic Forum and, of course, the Valdai Discussion Club Conference. So issues are discussed that are just in accordance with the current situation. And what we have witnessed during the recent Munich Security Conference, this situation testifies of the lack of the desire to see the reality. During the pandemics, they just were discussing how to put obstacles to the development of China and Russia, but people suffered from COVID-19. It was not studied enough back then. But the security, they were trying to discuss it somehow without any connection to the situation on the planet. So it's the lack of a desire or just strong desire to ignore the reality. It leads to self-destruction, what they are doing or what they were doing at the Munich conference this year. Let me quote one example. We will come back to the Munich conference, how they ignore this reality. Just have a look. At the end of February this year, the annual report by Norwegian Special Services, Intelligence Services was presented, and counterintelligence of Norway. It has a lot of groundless accusations of our country, accusations of creating a whole range of threats. This time it's no exception. It's just one of the bricks of that road on which the Western community is walking, just refusing to admit the actual situation. According to those intelligence services, Russia is a source of immediate risks for Norway, European security, and the Western world order, as they put it. And during the Munich conference, also attended by Norway, they stated that their world order, rules-based world order, it does not exist. It just collapsed or was not built because everything was given to the Kiev regime as assistance. And how is Russia accused of being a threat to Western world order? And them simultaneously stating that they have not succeeded in building that world order. So any reaction to just actual threats, there is no such reaction. For example, environmental threats, it's lacking. Notably, they mention the interests of Russia and China in weakening the transatlantic alliance amid the disagreements over Greenland. So how are Russia and China engaged here in the context of Greenland and this transatlantic alliance of Russia and China? How did Russia and China influence the crisis situation in transatlantics? What have we done? We were not engaged in that. It's their problems. They created them themselves. They have a lot of claims, accusations against each other, stated directly or indirectly. So it's just ignoring the actual facts in favor of current situational interests. It's about Greenland, Ukrainian conflict, and the Nord Stream pipeline terror attacks. So it's they are not interested in actual facts and figures. It's just narratives about the rules-based world order. They are starting to forget about that and to abandon this meme, but other issues are still alive and on the agenda. It's just about Russia. They mention Russia's activities in different spheres of activity. The work of our embassy in Oslo, scientific vessels and fishing vessels, there are insinuations that there is the influence of the Kremlin everywhere. They have such illusions. Sanctions against the Russian fishing companies Norebo and Murmansk Seafood under the pretext of their involvement in intelligence activities. Those sanctions are absurd. What else have they invented? What other ideas are in the offing? So Oslo's actions are not in accordance with the long-term interests of either Russia or Norway, and their centricity. It does not have any relation to the reality. The use of some illusory narratives and the texts they are based on, and then they find themselves in the place that according to the NATO drills in the Baltic states, the Brussels military chiefs mentioned. And in this report, there are statements about the engagement of Russia. It's a very popular instrument of manipulation and intimidation of the population in Norway in order to justify their own problems or militaristic expenses, taxes, and expanding the powers of the intelligence agencies. So that's they are talking about it because they have been ordered by some of their curators or so-called allies in that transatlantic link. They just invent those statements that Russia makes them knows about Russia and China. So that's how the distorted reality is created with just illusionary threats, with aggressive plans that do not exist. So this illusionary picture is just stuck to the walls of the Munich conference on the issues of policy, security policy, in order for it to be more comfortable to state the end of the world order, the world order that is based on the non-existent rules. They just need to appeal to the issue of Russophobia in order to explain on the failures and the lack of logics in their actions. And now, at this moment, the Munich conference has become a parade of such ideas and tactics. And in the context of the issue of Norway and Arctic, we are against the escalation in the Arctic region and the preservation of this region as a space for international cooperation and peace. You know, we will come back to the issue of Munich. I would like to say a few words about the Arctic. There are a lot of statements about that, a lot of articles, comments, and our colleagues that just make confrontational statements. This region is used in their narratives as a conflict potential zone. Our counterparts, it's their habit already to justify nearly any actions by Russia, to qualify them as threats. So once again, in the context of what we have mentioned now, the reports of Norway intelligence services, the comments we have made, because the alleged Russian threat in the Arctic has been mentioned on many occasions in recent days. As a major Arctic power, Russia is interested in maintaining stability and peace in the Arctic region. This aim is enshrined in the concept of the foreign policy of the Russian Federation and other framework documents. It's our priority, despite any oscillations in the political situation. We are ready to maintain dialogue with everyone who is ready for constructive interaction in the Arctic region and to resolve the issues in the polar region. The cooperation with foreign states that is developed in the Arctic is not against any other states.
Its target is the sustainable economic development, the improvement of life of the North, and concerns about the indigenous peoples. All those who are interested in the Arctic are referred to experts rather than just fan lovers. They are aware of the fact that the attempts to blame Russia for this is unbiased. The development of the Arctic region is our legitimate right. The Russian infrastructure beyond the polar circle, including the military one, has long existed consistent with the current environment and plays an important role for defense and other purposes. We see that the bloc-associated discipline, or major, in fact, it's the command and administration of the NATO, and I refer to all our, NATO states, continue to build up its military presence, engaging the armed forces from extra-regional countries. Many drills are being taken, including against the false actor, and we know that it is Russia. So I think that the one who is to blame for all these actions are the Europeans and the Western countries themselves. And I believe that it has nothing to do with Russia and China. It's not just a geographic part of Russia, but an integral part of the cultural identity of our citizens. It's a home to indigenous peoples of Russia who explored the polar circle region. And very soon we will have another occasion to remember about that. We celebrate the Arctic Day on the 28th of February. Russia supports the development of Arctic region, concerns about the well-being of its citizens and the environment. So any attempts to impede that process are doomed to a failure. And let me continue the Munich topic, if you don't mind, because out of the pocket we are now witnessing debates on the Navalny case. Although it seems that there is an international mechanism, this is both bilateral cooperation and law enforcement authorities and international organizations who for all these years have been exploring and studying and analyzing the same cases, trying to find some information. But they don't need it because there is the Munich conference, security conference, which is used for that purposes. We've seen a lot, but still raise our eyebrows. With the Skripal's cases and the same stories on the Navalny poisoning on the 16th of February, the court, which deals with the facts and chemical formulas, the whole world has seen another anti-Russia narrative about the case of Navalny, who was accused of fraudster and then blamed for the spread of terrorism, in addition to insinuations and allegations of the so-called poisoning by the Novichok poison. 2 years after, we are facing another accusation, but this time of the poison, of the frog poison. To all those who is not following the Skripal case, I think this would sound weird and awkward. Because it's unbelievable that the serious experts would publicly flare up tensions in order to draw attention to the Munich conference. But let me remind you that there was the Skripal's code, there were lies. There was a lot of evidence near the lake where the Skripals was sitting. And so it's all one and the same story. This is the invention of the information agenda with such bright traps to attract attention of just the common citizens. They are referring to some chemicals, formulas, labs, analysis, OPCW. It's all this is the concern of the experts. And the Western countries are right now trying to engage all other common people. And it's simple here. The authors of these scenarios, yet 2 of them, bet on triggering another primitive anti-Russia anti-Russian narrative. In order to flare up the anti-Russian narrative at the Munich conference. But their fantasies and their delirious mind conceal a history-long experience of the British colonizers. And this expels just surprise. And we need to offer a plausible explanation. But right now we see that this Russophobic campaign is beyond any reason. And we have already mentioned it during this briefing. We hope that these states, the request of the OPCW, will be responded in an adequate manner. Let me recall you that the Russian Federation for many years has been waiting for the response from the UK on the outstanding issues on the Skripal's cases. For example, in September 2018, Foreign Office informed our embassy about the denial of our request submitted by the Prosecutor General's office, request for legal assistance. And since the provocation, and that's how we view it, Salisbury provocation, the embassy of the Russian Federation in London sent over 60 diplomatic notes to the Home Ministry of the UK. 60 requests have been sent. And I cited you the figures that are based not on the comments or briefings or some messages or social posts. These are official requests to the Home Office of the United Kingdom to submit any information on this regard. So these, our requests, I would call them so, because they were very substantial documents. We showed our intention to cooperate and engage on this topic. Many of the questions we raised have not been responded yet. On some points we were just brushed off. The same situation with the previous scenario with Mr. Navalny. Our numerous requests to the countries complicit of this provocation, as well as the technical secretariat of the OPWC, sent by the Prosecutor Generals and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia under Article 9 of the PCW, and they were submitted under the legal assistance request under the European Convention 1959. They were not responded, all of them. Likewise, the principal question on whereabouts and how, beyond the territory of Russia, the biomaterials of Navalny ended up in having the traces of the substance found by the German chemists, unknown specialists from France, Sweden, which were studied by two relevant labs selected by the OPWC Technical Secretariat, whose flag is concealed. And I wonder, and I think the whole world is wondering, because we're hearing a lot of things about this case, questions to the answers to the original questions. But that's not the case. Now these are frogs who help the West. As of today, the Skripal's cases and other allegations, the Russian Federation and its permanent mission in UK, Germany, France, Sweden, as well as the Prosecutor General's Office of Russia, submitted the requests to the above-mentioned countries as well as to the Technical Secretariat. submitted over 100 diplomatic missions, official requests, and other requests. And there is no wonder that we have not received any answers yet. Instead, the fever-mind cheerleaders continue to make new horror movies about anti-Russia policy in order to nurture these sentiments in the countries. And I wonder, and I can cite the Epstein files with the horrible crimes, and they concealed it. I know that they have a well-made and invented story of the Skripal's cases and the tool they used to use. Right now, it's about frogs. And shortly after the announcement of these allegations, as for the reasons of death, the French made other remarks. And I think that's because there are frogs that are connected with this case. The Foreign Minister of France, Mr. Barrot, went even beyond, claiming that our country is ready to use bacteriological weapon warfare against its own population. And I think they are not aware of what is happening inside the country. Here, they all the time claim that it's bacteriological weapon. And let me remind you that before that, they referred to chemical weapons. And right now, it's bacteriological warfare. If you don't mind, I'll answer to all these messages in the social media. I think the top officials of France. The French foreign minister must be recalled the story of his own country. The case of poisons has become the most outrageous and high-profile cases of the Louis the 14th. Back then, a network of fraudsters was acting at that time, who supplied poison to rich women who wanted to kill their own relatives or husbands. And we know how such ladies in Paris act against their own husbands. These poisons back then was called as the substance of heirs because they were used in order to get money and the heritage. A special chamber and court was even established to investigate into such cases. Dozens of people were blamed for that and sentenced to death, about 400 people, including a famous lady, one famous lady in France. It became a tool to fight and led to the hysteria. And Louis XIV ordered to destroy all the documents with poisons. 150 years later, France has witnessed a process which has become very famous. In 1840, a young woman, Maria Zakharova, was blamed for poisoning her husband with another substance. The story was internationally known. Why? Because the process was written all across the world. Why? Because for the first time in toxicology, it was the main instrument of the testimony. The defense argued the analysis, and this case has become a milestone in forensics, medical forensics, and that was the start point of the scientific base proving the poisoning. Tell me, please, and I wonder, if in 1940 in Central Europe, and particularly in France, this method of scientific evidence was chosen, we can remember it right now and wonder, where are these formulas? So just a common person makes his blood test, providing material with a stamp, all the relevant documents, on the medical documents with all the names on it. I wonder, what's the point here? It has nothing to do with all those frogs poisoning. Because no official organization or lab can write such things. But even back then, in Central Europe, this methodology was used, and I refer to this attitudes towards investigation. I think they should recall it. Likewise, the classical writers, since we've started to memorialize the Skripal's cases. And let me cite you French writers, great French writers, for example, Alexandre Dumas, who invented the image, a demonizing image of Catherine de' Medici. And he knew what he was doing. In this novel, the poison becomes a tool of big policy, and Dumas describes this in detail, brilliantly. Let me recall you that there is a notion of Charles IX, and let me stress this, it's a fiction. But reflects. René, listen to me. You poisoned with your gloves the Queen Navarskaya. You poisoned with the smoke of the lamp the Prince Parsin. You tried to poison with the apple Prince Condé. And these are quotes from the novels of Dumas. But the well-known doctor, he's not a writer but a doctor, the doctor Ambroise Paré viewed that all the perfume, gloves, and jewelry and cosmetics made by the royal masters had poison in them. And historian records believe that she was the one to blame for the killing of Henrik IV, who was offered poisoned gloves. So, when next time the French Foreign Ministry wants to talk about poisoning, I think they'd better start about their own history, the history of France. And right now we will switch to the situation in Ukraine.
Recently, it has been 12 years since the tragic events whose main point was the anti-constitutional coup d'etat in Kiev. Under the mottos of democracy, their favorite mottos, freedom of speech and fighting corruption, of course, and the promises of a bright European future. The crowd of strongmen, of militants, radicals, puppets of Western political elite. This crowd of radicals manipulated by the West has replaced the legal authorities. And what was the end of that, and what is the continuation? I think I do not need to repeat that. We see that every day. It led to just rampant nationalism and ignoring human rights, fighting Russian language and history, deterioration of economic situation, and the collapse of social institutions in Ukraine as such. The consequences of the political crisis that started back then could have been not so hard. There was a chance, and it was given by the document signed in 2014 with the mediatorship of Germany, France, and Poland of the agreement that envisaged constitutional reform and immediate presidential elections. Its implementation could have provided, and nearly all the political experts say that, could have avoided those tragic events. But the idea of those mediators, it was different. And the winners of Euromaidan, it was just an unneeded obstacles to the ruling positions, financial flows, material resources. It was just connivance of Western guarantors of the agreement. The US, the EU, they just did not even try to correct those opposition figures and to demand the observance of their commitment. They just hurried up to state the change of power in Ukraine and started to promote that anti-Russian beastly, those beastly actions, Russophobic policy stimulated, and they started, instead of taking into account historical peculiarities, ethnocultural peculiarities of Ukraine, started to construct the ethnocratic state, not for everyone. Just remember the Euromaidan motto: Ukraine will become Ukrainian and humanless, with no people. And Tymoshenko just called upon shooting from nuclear weapons. The Russians and Russian-speaking citizens residing in Ukraine. It's just okay for the political, so to say, reality situation of another experiment field for the Westerners. Further development of the situation is well known. Those who protected the constitution, who did not accept the coup d'etat, they were accused of being traitors to the interests of Maidan. Because it's obvious that the interests of Maidan are not the interests of the people of Ukraine. Moreover, they were declared terrorists. Just imagine those people who said they have elected the authorities, did it legally, they voted, and they had the constitution that was not cancelled by anyone, regional laws. They were named terrorists. And those who are now killing civilians, killing them by Ukrainian army drones, and attacking with Lepidstock mines that maim children, and then killing doctors who are trying to help civilians, women and children, and continue to send drones of the Ukrainian army. They do not call them terrorists. They do not call terrorists those who caused explosions of Nord Stream, who shoot at oil reservoirs and the oil pipelines. They do not call terrorists those who destroy hospitals and schools. No. National radicals just started back then to mercilessly exterminate the population of Ukraine. Because they are talking about anti-constitutional actions in Ukraine. Because those people, they stood for the preservation of the constitutional order. It was the native population, and there was another meeting of the contact group within the Ramstein format for defense cooperation with Ukraine under the chairmanship of Germany. It was just false accusation against our country for this catastrophic situation of the civilians in Ukraine, and supporting those Ukrainian army soldiers who kill civilians, just facilitating terror attacks against civilians. The Pentagon had ignored that meeting again, but it was the first event for new Ukrainian Defense Minister Fedorov, who provided a long list for the supplies of long-range missiles, different munitions, and so on. As a result, the Europeans, despite the exhaustion of their own stockpiles of weapons and poor economic figures, offered military aid of $35 billion to Ukraine. The main sponsors of Ukraine are Germany, Norway, $7 billion. And they needed those reports against Russia for that. Sweden, that will pay 3.7 billion euro, Britain 3 billion British pounds. It's a modest support in comparison with Sweden and Norway. Denmark as well, among the leaders of military supplies to Ukraine. They just bore the burden of more than 24 billion euro from 29 billion euro. It's just investing into the slaughter. They're not worried about the Kiev regime not being able to win on the battlefield. In this hybrid war unleashed by themselves, because it's just an instrument. And the purposes of the Kiev regime itself are not able just to steal, to kill. It's not of interest to them. The aggressive purposes of Ramstein and similar gathering, it was stated by Rutte. He said that the support to Ukraine should go on despite the peaceful negotiations, and the alliance believes that it is necessary to further strengthen the Ukrainian army military potential in order to put obstacles to Russia. And now let us remember, back then they demanded a ceasefire. The Westerners requested a ceasefire from Russia, and now they are talking about supplying weapons to the Kiev regime despite peaceful negotiations. They just aim to continue the slaughter, the hybrid war, and someone steals, someone just enjoys the killing, someone just explaining to their own voters why it is the case and why those problems have appeared. So it's NATO Munich Security Conference. I will just not provide more details because I think it's already clear. But former Western politicians, they highlighted that the militarization of Ukraine and the EU will continue despite the dynamics of the settlement. So the question is, what about the settlement if despite its progress and dynamics, the slaughter will continue with even more zeal, as we understand now from their aspirations. And now we see who wants peace and who does not want that, who's never wanted it. And that confirms the lack of interest of the British EU war party to search for the end to this conflict. So it's just beastly statements by Zelensky himself. He thanked the EU members for the so-called military credit of 90 billion euros, and he called upon them to continue their actions to supply funds to the Ukrainian army and weapons. And he said that he will not take into account any losses. Just imagine his election program, if he is to participate in elections, or will continue to implement this offer of the West despite any losses. So who will vote for him? At least one vote. So he does not need any elections just to swear allegiance before those allegiance until the last Ukrainian, before those who provide funds for him. And who needs to continue this bloody corruption scheme, taking into account that hundreds of billions of funds have been allocated these years, but a fact remains a fact. During the Munich conference, he mentioned his intention to monthly kill 50,000 Russians. It was just his insane ideas about NATO membership, requests from NATO and EU members, some 30, 50 year strong, as he said, security guarantees. He said that there will be no election and political settlements without the ceasefire. It's against the background of the statements by Europeans to which he had applauded. Despite the negotiations and settlement, they will not stop those hostilities, but he requested a ceasefire, so unilateral ceasefire. They hope that Russia will pause all that and observe the supplies of weapons, rearmament of the Kiev regime, and without taking into account its losses. So let them just search for fools themselves. Zelensky tried to focus on the his main target, combating Russia. It was a disagreement within the transatlantic partnership. German Chancellor Merz has mentioned that. He said that the transatlantic partnership, it's a quotation, no longer something that they can take for granted. The Germans can take for granted. He said it's a big abyss, end of quote. So this support is regarded by the Kiev regime as a carte blanche for terrorist crimes, military crimes. Before another negotiations round in Geneva that has now started, he intensified attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure of Russia. The sites of water supply, electricity supplies, and he does not conceal that. And this week, 147 civilians in Russia suffered from Ukrainian army actions. 21 people died. I will just quote the specific facts. In the Belgorod region on the 11th of February, there was a shell wound caused to a 14-year-old girl, and as a result of a missile strike in Belgorod, 2 employees were killed and several were wounded. 5 people also suffered. There were casualties in settlements, and children suffered. Due to HIMARS strikes, 2 people were killed and 3 were wounded. As a result of the attack of a drone against a civilian car, a civilian was killed. And on the 14th of February, there was a massive strike of enemy drones in the region. Many drones were destroyed, and an employee of a mobile company was wounded. A person engaged in reparation of the network. In the Donetsk People Republic, the settlement of Velikaya Lebetika, as a result of a drone strike, children were wounded, 9 and 10 years old. On the 13th of February, in Malakovka settlement, passenger cars were struck by drones and 14 people were wounded. 1 civilian was killed and 23 were wounded. Also, a 10-year-old girl. Volgograd region, a house was struck, a house of a big family with many children. A 12-year boy was wounded. The house was totally destroyed. So those killed, those wounded children, women and old men, old people, elderly people, did they participate in fighting, in hostilities? Were they just legal target of the servicemen? But they were the target of those who considers them a target for themselves, considers this target as legal terrorists. It's obvious violation of international humanitarian law, international terrorist acts, and international organizations keep silent about that. And the punishment of foreign mercenaries is just inevitable. 9,000, more than 9,000 cases have been initiated by Russian prosecution. His Russian volunteer corps, Vasily Kirishenko, he developed plans to invade, and accusations are put against him. The commander of Marine Corps of the Ukrainian Army, Alexander Shevtsov, who ordered in 2024-2025 of unmanned vehicles attacks in the Black Sea and private houses in Tuapse. He is on the international wanted list and sentenced to 14 years of imprisonment. Citizens of Finland, Sulka Koski-Konsti, and Japanese citizens Yuya Matamori, they are on the international wanted list. All the named fact confirms the relevance of the tasks of the denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine and the elimination of threats from its territory. The aims will be fulfilled, as repeatedly stated by Russian leaders, and the participation of mercenaries in the Ukrainian conflict. The cutting-edge weapons that are supplied to the Ukrainian armed forces, they can not be used by the Ukrainian soldiers who lack skills to use such weapons. It can be done only by foreign specialists like American HIMARS system, British French Storm Shadow system, and other weapons used for Kiev regime in order to strike our territory. Moreover, foreign councils are engaged in the development and intelligence operations with Western data and Western systems of targeting.
The foreign mercenaries fight on the side of Ukraine. They are being engaged for exploitation of the foreign planes. At first, The Hague supplied 24 old F-16 jet fighters. Right now, these are instructors, and I think next will be the hit pilots. So we see how they save their money because they don't need to pay for the disposal. And I think that's not the first case when the Dutch mercenaries are being engaged in a direct conflict with Russia. And let me remind you that the mercenaries are not covered by the international law